My mother's obvious preference for my younger brother created a dynamic that poisoned our relationship from childhood. What started as typical sibling rivalry evolved into something truly sinister, culminating in an act of betrayal so profound it permanently altered our family forever. I was born in Oak Ridge, Connecticut, a quiet suburb where family values were supposedly sacred. From my earliest memories, it was clear that my parents' love wasn't distributed equally between their two sons. My younger brother, Tyler, arrived 3 years after me, and from that moment, he became the center of my mother's universe. I wasn't blind to it, even as a child. Where I was introverted and thoughtful, Tyler was outgoing and charismatic. He knew how to work a room from the age of 5, making adults laugh with his antics while I preferred the quiet company of books. My father, Robert, tried to balance the scales, but my mother, Linda, made no attempt to hide her favoritism. The difference in how we were treated was subtle at first: extra dessert for Tyler, more enthusiasm for his achievements, more forgiveness for his mistakes. But as we grew older, the gap widened. Tyler figured out quickly that he could get away with almost anything where I was concerned. It started with small provocations, taking my toys, interrupting me when I spoke, making fun of my interests. Whenever I complained to our mother, she would dismiss it with platitudes: "That's just how brothers bond," or "He's younger, you need to be more understanding." By the time I was 12 and Tyler was 9, his behavior had escalated dramatically. He would deliberately sabotage my school projects, once accidentally spilling juice over a science report I'd spent weeks preparing. He read my private journal and shared embarrassing details with his friends. He put spoiled milk in my cereal and claimed it was just a joke when I got sick. The physical pranks grew increasingly dangerous. He once moved a chair as I was sitting down, causing me to hit my head on the edge of our dining table, resulting in a trip to the emergency room for stitches. My mother's blind spot where Tyler was concerned was absolute. She couldn't, or wouldn't, see what was happening right under her roof. My father occasionally intervened when he witnessed something particularly egregious, but he was often away on business trips, leaving me to fend for myself. The isolation I felt was crushing. Home should have been my sanctuary, but instead, it became a place I dreaded returning to each day. The situation worsened when Tyler formed an alliance with the school bullies in 7th grade. Somehow, he'd managed to befriend the very kids who targeted me, and now he fed them information about my insecurities, which they weaponized with cruel precision. The verbal abuse escalated to the point where Tyler and his friends would tell me nobody would care if I killed myself. I began avoiding the cafeteria, spending lunch periods hiding in the library. The breaking point came when I was 15. I had fallen asleep while studying, and woke to the smell of burning hair and Tyler standing over me with a lighter, giggling as he tried to set my hair on fire. The look in his eyes, a mixture of excitement and malice, haunts me to this day. There was genuine pleasure there, watching me panic as I frantically patted out the flames. My father walked in just as this was happening. I'll never forget the transformation in his face, from confusion to horror to a cold, controlled fury I'd never seen before. He grabbed the lighter from Tyler's hand and for the first time, my brother looked genuinely scared. My father's voice was low and steady as he told Tyler that if anything like this ever happened again, he would call the police himself. Tyler's face went pale. It was clear he had never expected real consequences for his actions. That night, my father came to my room and sat on the edge of my bed. For the first time, I broke down completely, telling him everything: years of torment, the school bullying, the escalating physical abuse, all of it. I could see the guilt in his eyes, the realization that he had failed to protect me. The next day, he took me to the local karate studio and signed me up for classes, telling me that while violence wasn't the answer, knowing how to defend myself was a basic right. He also went to my school and had a lengthy meeting with the principal. The bullying didn't stop overnight, but having my father's acknowledgement and support made an immeasurable difference. For the first time, I wasn't facing it alone. About a month later, Tyler stole money from my wallet, $20 I'd earned helping our neighbor with yard work. When confronted, he denied it, despite being seen spending unusual amounts at the corner store. When he tried to shove me during the argument, muscle memory from my training kicked in. I blocked his push and struck back for the first time in our lives. It wasn't a hard hit, but the shock on his face was absolute. He wasn't physically hurt, but something fundamental had changed in our dynamic. My mother, of course, was furious with me. She couldn't comprehend that her precious younger son wasn't always the victim. My father, however, stood firmly on my side, telling her bluntly that Tyler had been terrorizing me for years while she looked the other way. It was perhaps the first serious argument I'd ever witnessed between my parents. After the physical confrontation, Tyler kept his distance. The torment didn't stop entirely, but it changed form. The physical aggression gave way to more sophisticated emotional warfare, rumors, isolation tactics, passive-aggressive comments. He would communicate with me through our mother, making me seem unreasonable when I refused to engage. My mother constantly pressured me to be more understanding of Tyler, to be the bigger person, because that's just how he is. She refused to acknowledge her role in enabling his behavior or to take any meaningful steps to address the conflict between us. The tension in our house was constant, making me increasingly desperate to escape. I threw myself into academics with renewed focus, knowing that education was my ticket out. The dream of college, of starting fresh somewhere far from Tyler's shadow, kept me going through the darkest days. When I received a full scholarship to Northwestern University in Illinois during my senior year, it felt like the first ray of light in a very long tunnel. My father celebrated with me, taking me out for a special dinner, just the two of us. My mother commented that I was abandoning the family, while Tyler pretended indifference. The day I left for college was the first time I felt like I could breathe freely in years. The 8-hour drive to Evanston might as well have been to another planet. As the familiar landscape of Connecticut faded in the rearview mirror, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. On campus, surrounded by strangers who knew nothing about me or my brother, I could finally become whoever I wanted to be. College was transformative. I made real friends for the first time since elementary school, people who valued me for my thoughts, my humor, my loyalty. I joined clubs, went to parties, stayed up all night having philosophical discussions. The constant vigilance that had been necessary at home fell away, allowing parts of my personality that had been suppressed to flourish. It was at a Halloween party during my junior year that I met Sarah. She was dressed as Amelia Earhart, with a vintage leather flight jacket and goggles pushed up on her forehead. I was immediately drawn to her confidence and the way she laughed, fully and without self-consciousness. We talked until sunrise about everything from childhood memories to our dreams for the future. With Sarah, I felt seen in a way I never had before. Our relationship progressed naturally and intensely. She was studying journalism, passionate about exposing injustice and giving voice to the voiceless. I was majoring in computer science, finding satisfaction in the logical, orderly world of programming. We balanced each other perfectly, her spontaneity pulling me out of my shell, my stability providing a foundation for her creative energy. During our senior year, Sarah missed her period. The pregnancy test showed 2 clear lines. We sat on the bathroom floor of her apartment, alternating between panic and excited planning. We were young, too young, realistically, but the thought of creating a family of our own, one built on mutual respect and genuine love, was irresistible. We decided to keep the baby and get married after graduation. Our wedding was small and simple, held in a park near campus. My parents came, Tyler in tow. It was the first time I'd seen him in almost 2 years, and I was surprised to find that his presence no longer affected me the way it once had. Distance and happiness had healed more than I realized. Sarah's parents hosted a modest reception at their home in nearby Wilmette. I remember looking around at our gathered families and friends and feeling, for the first time, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. We settled in Chicago after graduation. I found work at a tech startup, while Sarah took on freelance writing assignments that she could manage alongside her pregnancy. Our son, Ethan, was born in the middle of a January snowstorm. Holding him for the first time, this tiny, perfect person who was half me and half the woman I loved, was overwhelming in its intensity. I promised him silently that he would never know the kind of childhood I had experienced, that he would always feel secure in his parents' love. The early years of our marriage and parenthood were challenging but beautiful. We navigated sleep deprivation, financial stress, and the constant adjustments that come with raising a child. But beneath these normal struggles was a foundation of genuine partnership and joy. Watching Ethan grow, taking his first steps, forming his first words, developing his own distinct personality, filled me with a sense of wonder I hadn't known was possible. When Ethan was 4, I found text messages on Sarah's phone. She had been having an affair with a colleague at the magazine where she had recently started working full-time. The discovery felt like being doused in ice water, shocking, disorienting, painful. We separated briefly while I processed the betrayal. For weeks, I cycled through rage, grief, and confusion. How could she risk what we had built together? How could I ever trust her again? Ultimately, for Ethan's sake, I agreed to try to repair our marriage. Sarah was remorseful, blaming the affair on insecurity and the adjustment to balancing motherhood with her revived career ambitions. We went to couples therapy, established new boundaries, rebuilt trust bit by bit. I chose to believe that people could make terrible mistakes without being terrible people. I chose to believe in second chances. For almost 2 years, things improved. Our communication was more honest, our appreciation for each other more conscious. Then I discovered that Sarah had reconnected with an ex-boyfriend through Facebook. The pattern repeated: confrontation, confession, promises to change. This time, the reconciliation process was harder, my forgiveness more hesitant. But again, the thought of Ethan growing up in a broken home compelled me to try. I had sworn he would have a stable family, unlike my own childhood, and I was determined to keep that promise. 4 relatively peaceful years followed. Ethan started elementary school, thriving socially and academically. I received a significant promotion at work, while Sarah established herself as a respected cultural critic. We bought a small house in Oak Park, a family-friendly suburb with excellent schools. We talked about having another child, though we never quite felt ready to take that step. From the outside, we were the picture of a successful young family. I had almost convinced myself that our past problems were firmly behind us. Then came the night that shattered everything. I arrived home early from a business trip to find Sarah sitting at our kitchen table, unnaturally calm, clearly having prepared for a difficult conversation. She told me she needed to confess something that had been weighing on her for years. My first thought was yet another affair, and I braced myself for that familiar pain. What she revealed instead was far worse than I could have imagined. Sarah told me that she wasn't sure I was Ethan's biological father. The timing of her pregnancy coincided with not only our relationship but also with someone else she had been seeing secretly. As I sat there, numb with shock, she finally revealed the identity of this other man, my brother, Tyler. The room seemed to tilt sideways as she explained. They had first connected during a holiday gathering at my parents' home, shortly after Sarah and I had started dating. Tyler had visited us in Chicago several times over the years, ostensibly to strengthen his relationship with me, but actually to continue his clandestine relationship with my wife. Sarah claimed she had tried to end it multiple times but kept getting pulled back in. She admitted that she had deliberately planned activities for the 3 of us, presenting it as an attempt to heal the brothers' relationship while actually creating opportunities for her and Tyler to be near each other. The level of deception was staggering. Years of secret meetings, coded messages, lies piled upon lies. The betrayal wasn't just a momentary weakness or a single bad decision, it was sustained, deliberate, and calculated. And it involved the two people who had caused me the most pain in my life, now conspiring together in the cruelest possible way. I didn't shout or break things as she may have expected. Instead, I felt an eerie calm descend over me. I asked practical questions about the timeline, about how certain she was of Ethan's paternity, about how long this relationship had been going on. Then I went upstairs, packed an overnight bag, and left. Sarah called after me, crying, saying we needed to think about what was best for Ethan. The irony of her sudden concern for our son's well-being was not lost on me. I checked into a hotel and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall for hours. The next morning, I drove to Connecticut. I needed to confront this situation head-on, to look my parents in the eye as I told them what their precious younger son had done. I arrived at my childhood home unannounced. My mother was surprised but pleased to see me, immediately asking about Sarah and Ethan. My father sensed something was wrong from my expression. We sat in the living room where I had spent so many unhappy hours as a child, and I laid out the whole sordid story, watching their faces change as the magnitude of the betrayal sank in. My mother's first instinct, predictably, was to defend Tyler. She suggested that Sarah must be lying, that she was trying to create drama, that there must be some misunderstanding. My father sat in stunned silence, the color draining from his face. I calmly took out my phone and called Tyler on speakerphone, asking him to confirm or deny Sarah's claims. He started with denial, but when I mentioned specific details that Sarah had revealed, his tone changed. In a stunning display of moral bankruptcy, he tried to shift the blame entirely to Sarah, claiming she had pursued him aggressively and that he had been weak. My father finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. He talked about family loyalty, about sacred boundaries, about the unforgivable nature of what Tyler had done. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother at a loss for how to defend her favorite son. The proof was too overwhelming, the betrayal too complete. My father announced that he would no longer pay for Tyler's graduate school tuition. My mother protested weakly, but the look my father gave her silenced any further objections. In that moment, I glimpsed a shift in my mother's perception, the first crack in the perfect image she had maintained of Tyler all these years. With my father's help, I found a good divorce attorney. We also arranged for a paternity test, which confirmed what Sarah had suggested: Ethan was not biologically mine. Instead, he shared DNA with my brother. The clinical language of the test results couldn't begin to capture the emotional devastation this knowledge inflicted. The hardest part was accepting that the child I had raised and loved for 8 years was not biologically mine. I tried to maintain my relationship with Ethan during the divorce proceedings, but each time I looked at him, I now saw hints of Tyler in his features that I had somehow missed before: the shape of his smile, the way he tilted his head when confused. These observations brought waves of pain that made it increasingly difficult to be around him, despite the deep love I still felt. Sarah fought for primary custody, which I didn't contest. The court ordered me to pay child support, but after the paternity test results, my lawyer successfully argued against this. I walked away from the marriage with most of our assets and a hollow victory that brought no satisfaction. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in downtown Chicago, stripped of the family and life I had built. The adjustment to solitude was harsh. Weekends stretched endlessly. I threw myself into work, taking on projects that required long hours and intense focus, anything to keep my mind occupied. I started running obsessively, pushing my body to exhaustion to find dreamless sleep. Meanwhile, back in Connecticut, the family dynamics had shifted seismically. My father, true to his word, had altered his will to leave almost everything to me, including the family home and his retirement accounts. He left Tyler exactly $1, enough to make it clear the disinheritance was intentional rather than an oversight. When Tyler discovered this change through a loose-lipped family attorney, he was furious. He called me, alternating between rage and pathetic pleading. He complained about struggling to pay his university fees, about Sarah demanding child support, about being cut off from family gatherings. His words washed over me without effect. I felt nothing for him anymore, not even hatred. I simply reminded him that actions have consequences, and ended the call. Tyler's next strategy was to approach our mother, relying on her lifelong pattern of protecting him. For a time, she secretly sent him money and maintained contact against my father's wishes. When this was discovered, it nearly ended my parents' marriage. My father threatened divorce if she couldn't respect this boundary, a line he had never before drawn in their 40-year relationship. It was a testament to how profoundly Tyler's betrayal had affected him. To my surprise, my mother ultimately chose her marriage over her relationship with Tyler. This decision didn't come easily or all at once. I witnessed her internal struggle through tearful phone calls and visits. The maternal instinct to protect her child warred with her emerging recognition of the genuine harm he had caused. For perhaps the first time, she was forced to see Tyler as he truly was, not as she had imagined him to be. Her grief was palpable as she mourned not only the loss of her relationship with her younger son but also the loss of her illusions about him. In the aftermath, my relationship with my father deepened. We began regular fishing trips, something we had rarely done when I was growing up. During these quiet hours on the water, we talked more openly than we ever had before. He expressed regret for not protecting me more as a child, for not standing up to my mother's favoritism, for not seeing the extent of Tyler's cruelty. These acknowledgments helped heal wounds I had carried for decades. Through relatives, I heard that Tyler had been forced to drop out of his graduate program due to financial constraints. He and Sarah were living together now, raising Ethan as their son. The poetic justice of this arrangement wasn't lost on me. The two people who had betrayed me, now bound to each other by the consequences of their actions. Whatever passion had fueled their deception had to face the harsh light of day, the mundane realities of bills, parenting challenges, and the weight of what they had done. 5 months after the divorce was finalized, I sat in my therapist's office, working through the complex layers of trauma that had shaped my life. I had finally recognized the pattern. From my childhood with Tyler to my marriage with Sarah, I had been drawn to relationships that replicated my earliest experiences of emotional abuse and betrayal. I had unconsciously sought out what was familiar, even when it was painful. Breaking this pattern would be the work of years, not weeks or months. I made a conscious decision to remain single for the foreseeable future, to focus on building a healthy relationship with myself before attempting to connect with someone else. I established firm boundaries with my mother, whose occasional attempts to rehabilitate Tyler's image I met with resolute clarity about what was and wasn't acceptable. At work, my focus and dedication earned me another promotion. The financial security this provided was a stabilizing force, giving me options my parents and brother had never imagined. I began volunteering with a mentoring program for boys from troubled homes, finding that helping others with similar childhood experiences brought unexpected healing. There are still days when the pain resurfaces without warning, seeing a father and son playing catch in the park, hearing Ethan's favorite song on the radio, passing a restaurant where we celebrated a family birthday. Grief comes in waves, receding for weeks only to crash back with devastating force. But each time, I recover more quickly. Each time, I understand more deeply that surviving this betrayal has made me stronger than I ever knew I could be. I don't know what the future holds, whether I'll ever trust enough to build a new family, whether the relationship with my mother will ever fully heal, whether I'll someday be able to look at Ethan without feeling the sharp edge of loss. What I do know is that the cycle of abuse and betrayal that defined my early life has been broken. Whatever comes next will be built on a foundation of hard-won self-respect and the knowledge that I deserve better than what was done to me. The path forward isn't about forgetting or even forgiving, but about refusing to let these betrayals define the rest of my life. It's about reclaiming my story from those who tried to write me as a secondary character, and understanding that the true measure of strength isn't in never falling, but in how we rise after being knocked down. And rise I have, one painful day at a time, toward a future entirely of my own making.